Gentleman from Maryland is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon to all of you. Mr. Goldfoot, let me stick with you. I think along the lines of the questions you were just getting, and some previous to that, I think it's clear at this point that there's bipartisan view that we'd like to do more with respect to addressing economic espionage issues and theft of trade secrets and the like. On a couple of occasions, you said if we had the resources, we would do more of these cases. And I don't know if that's which set of cases you meant, but one thing I did want to figure out, though, was what kind of resources do you need? Because it's a rare moment in Congress here where there's bipartisan agreement that this is something that needs to happen, especially with respect to the PRC. What sorts of resources do you need to ramp up the prosecution efforts?
Thank you for the question. So being a career official in the Department of Justice, it's not my place to make, for example, a budget request or anything independent of what the administration is, or what they're asking for. What I can tell you as far as the work we're supervising and what we're seeing, we use the resources we have in order to recruit and train prosecutors who can then work with investigators in the field to appropriately build cases. Intellectual property cases are hard. They're hard because of the statutes involved and the elements you need to prove. They're hard also increasingly because of the international aspect of them. I think that probably is one of the biggest changes we've seen in the last 10 or 15 years. We're no longer in the world of 2012 when you could do something like the mega upload takedown by just finding their servers in the United States and seizing them and knocking out one of the biggest infringers at the time. What you have now is the criminals are adapting to tactics like that. They're attempting to locate their businesses themselves and their servers in jurisdictions where they calculate, or sometimes incorrectly, that the United States cannot get law enforcement cooperation. So increasingly, the resource and tool we need isn't just within the Department of Justice. We rely on the nation's international relations.
Let me get you to focus on what is internal. I mean, do you need more investigators? Do you need more prosecutors? I mean, what do you need? What is it that we can do to help you ramp up those efforts? And I'm not asking you to, to sort of speak for the White House or anything along those lines on specific budgetary requests, but I do want to get a sense of what exactly we're talking about from, the standpoint of if you need additional resources, what are they?
Well, thank you for the question. I can just repeat that, with more input, you get more output. And I think we are looking, I think it's a mixture of everything that you have described here.
All right, let me, just a last point, I think, with respect to this issue. I think it was your testimony that touched on intended loss. Not to get too deep into the weeds on the sentencing guidelines, but I think it's a good point that you made with respect to the calculation of intended loss, depending on how low it is, undermines the likely range that you can get for jail time. And so, it says here that in your testimony, you're seeking to, with the Sentencing Commission, to get a reworking of the definition of how that's defined. A quick suggestion, I think part of the reason that judges increasingly became suspicious about that was because of the way the department was using it in some unrelated matters, but like credit card fraud. So, you get a guy steals a credit card that we can charge up to $20,000, and he buys something for $100, and the prosecutors come in and say, well, we think the sentencing guideline should be based on $20,000 calculation. Judges started dismissing that, basically. So I appreciate the fact you're going to the Sentencing Commission on this, but I'd encourage you to try and separate your prosecutions from those kinds of prosecutions. And then real quickly, I see I'm running out of time. One of the issues that I heard with respect to my participation on the Homeland Security Committee with some of the seizures, and this goes to at the border with respect to imported goods. This was forced labor, Uyghurs, China, and the like. I also raised the issue of forced and slave labor with respect to some minerals like cobalt coming largely from Africa, but frequently through China anyway. One of the things that was said by one of your colleagues at Homeland Security was that sometimes they would detect these goods and reject them as opposed to seizing them. In fact, it sounded like they reject them more than they seize them. And one of the things I asked them to do was to increase the number of seizures, because if you just reject it, they just send it somewhere else and they're not losing the money. It undermines the sanction that could be had. When you go through the effort, and as you pointed out, there's hundreds of millions of these items coming through. When you catch one, I think you have to put the hammer down to as much as possible. It's tough to prosecute these criminally sometimes, but administratively, do that if you can. And then the last quick point, the task force, the UFLPA task force, which I think DOJ is on as well, with respect to that type of labor, also isn't generating a lot of prosecutions or even the number of entities that are on these lists having been caught with trying to import these defective goods. If there's a way to ramp that up, I would appreciate it as well, because one way or the other, we've got to find ways to prosecute these cases or at least make an impact with administrative or civil sanctions, so we send the message back to China or whoever's sending these goods that we're going to enforce it and there's going to be a sanction for it. So I apologize for running over, Mr. Chairman, but I thank you for the time and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentlelady from Florida is recognized.